Welcome to Deploying vRealize Operations in vRealize Operations Cloud. The first thing we'll cover is sizing vRealize operations, and this pertains to vRealize operations on-premises installations. VMware offers a vRealize Operations Sizer web page. This is a publicly accessible web page. You can see the link at the bottom of the screen here. You simply go in, choose the version of vRealize Operations that you plan to install, and choose either basic or advanced options. Basic is good if the customer is only going to be monitoring their vCenter environment, but if they're going to add additional management packs and monitor other things like applications, hardware, and so forth, then you'll want to use the advanced option. Once you select the advanced or the basic option, you'll basically just fill out the number of objects in the customer's environment, along with additional parameters such as data retention, their projected growth, and so forth. There are defaults set, so you can accept those initially and then change them later, but that'll get you started very quickly. Note that there's a link to the general sizing guide for more details on the input parameters. Once you complete, the sizing recommendations are presented to you, and you can export them as a PDF. You'll notice here, for example, that the various node sizes, the various cluster sizes are presented, and the one that is the most recommended is the small node or cluster size. And just keep in mind that this is the minimal recommendation. You should always take into consideration expected growth or plan for growth. It's always better to scale nodes up than to add more nodes for growth. That's why you'll see recommendations here for medium, large, and extra large. So keep that in mind also. Also notice that continuous availability was selected in this case, and so there are additional notes about the additional witness node requirements. The single source of truth for all vRealize operations sizing is contained in a KB article. The website I talked about earlier just makes it simpler for you to consume that. But if you want all the details about sizing, all the factors that should be considered and included, you can go to the KB article, and this KB article will list all the sizing guides for all the supported versions of vRealize operations. So it's deep, comprehensive information, and there's also a spreadsheet that's included that you can download and use if you'd rather do that instead of using the website. It also includes information on network latency and bandwidth requirements. Once the cluster is deployed, you'll want to let your customer know that they should stay on top of the ongoing sizing and usage, resource usage of the cluster. So there are self-monitoring statistics and dashboards available in vRealize operations. So they should use this self-help to make sure that they do have adequate resources available. They don't need to add more capacity to their vRealize operations cluster or to avoid experiencing any kind of outages or poor performance. Let's talk about deployment architecture now. Here's a picture, a diagram rather, of the reference architecture for vRealize operations. And again, this is for on-premises installations. This actually comes from a document in the public documentation set that you can easily find, and it's called the reference architecture. And it contains a lot of helpful information about best practices, initial considerations. It looks at different requirements for hardware, ports, high availability, continuous availability, scalability, and it gives several different deployment profile examples. So always refer to this guide. Have it handy when you're planning for a new deployment or a scale out of an existing vRealize operations cluster. For vRealize Operations Cloud, this is the high-level architecture. We'll spend a little more time talking about vRealize Operations Cloud later in this module. But you can see here, excuse me, there are references to a vRealize Operations CP or cloud proxy called out by that little blue bubble there. So the cloud proxy is deployed in each of the customer's SDDCs or data centers to collect information from them and forward that information, push that information into vRealize Operations Cloud. So you can see that we deploy or employ the cloud proxy for both on-premises and VMware Cloud on AWS SDDCs. Let's look at some considerations for vRealize Operations Cloud and onboarding that. There are several regions available for vRealize Operations as of the recording of this video in early January 2022. This is the footprint of where customers can deploy or request a vRealize Operations Cloud service be available. There are more coming. We'll continue to grow this over time. So be sure to check that web link there at the top of the page, the top of this slide, so that you can keep up to date on those locations as new ones are added. A lot of times customers will ask about vRealize Operations Cloud and how secure it is. And so we've got that covered in several different documentations. We have several different security compliance certifications for vRealize Operations Cloud, and we also have independent auditor reports available. You can find that all at the link to the Trust Center, the VMware Cloud Trust Center. And by the way, that includes all VMware SaaS products, not just vRealize Operations Cloud. So you can find answers to all of the products there. I mentioned the cloud proxy earlier, and that's really how you connect your SDDC to vRealize Operations Cloud. It's a virtual appliance that you install in your SDDC, okay, in one of your vSphere clusters, and you can deploy it either on premises in your existing data centers, or it can be deployed in your hybrid clouds like VMC, VMware Cloud on AWS, Azure, VMware Services, or Google Compute VMware. It also includes an application remote collector, and this is required for the application monitoring process. Previously, you had to deploy that separately, but they just rolled that in just to make it simpler and reduce the architecture or simplify the architecture. Cloud proxies can achieve high availability by creating a group of cloud proxies that will work together. So if one of the cloud proxies fails, then another cloud proxy in the group will take over and continue forwarding metrics to vRealize Operations Cloud. And finally, for vRealize Operations Cloud updates, the cloud proxies are automatically upgraded. An upgrade is triggered for those when vRealize Operations Cloud is updated. So there's nothing for the customer to do once they've done that initial deployment of the cloud proxy. Cloud proxies, like other vRealize Operations components, have their own sizing requirements, and you can find that in the vRealize Operations Cloud sizing guidelines. Okay, and so there's a link to that KB article there. It talks about the small and the standard sizing requirements for those. We also offer self-help for the cloud proxy, just as we talked about earlier for the vRealize Operations cluster. So you can monitor the health, add new cloud proxies. There are alerts defined out of the box, and a best practice is called out here on the slide is to create notification rules for these alerts so that you can get an email, for example, if the cloud proxy is down or unable to connect to vRealize Operations Cloud, so you can address that right away and you don't miss out on some metric collection due to that. This is a diagram of the network traffic. You'll want to be familiar with this because, again, it comes up with customers' conversations when we're talking about vRealize Operations Cloud. But you'll notice the two different scenarios here. You have at the bottom the traditional on-premises customer data center, and then at the top you have VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC. And so basically we're using a cloud proxy, and in this case we're showing cloud proxies in collector groups for that high availability. But we've got that deployed in both VMware Cloud on AWS and in the customer's data center. In both cases, the cloud proxy needs to be able to communicate with the public internet back to the cloud services portal or the gateway rather for vRealize Operations Cloud. And so you'll see the requirements for the different types of environments there, the addresses or the FQDNs that need to be accessible through your cloud proxy. So you'll want to give this to your customer well ahead of time so that this can be reviewed by the security teams, and the necessary proxy and firewall rules can be added to accommodate this. You can add a custom root certificate during the deployment of the cloud proxy. It's in the OVA settings. There's a KB here that steps you through that if you need to do it after. So say you just deployed and forgot to do it, you don't feel like redeploying the cloud proxy, you can just follow this KB to add the root certificate later, after the fact. Now, in vRealize Operations Cloud, we have the customers have the ability to install management packs through the UI. So they would go to the integrations page, go to the repository tab, and then they can view all of the available management packs and then click one button, and that management pack will be added to their vRealize Operations Cloud instances. If a license is required, say for True Visibility Suite management packs, the customers should have that license available, and they'll need to apply that on the licensing page. If there is a management pack not listed that your customer wants, they can simply open an SR, and the SRE team that supports vRealize Operations Cloud will review that and get that added to your customer's environment. A lot of customers have questions about how do they give permissions and access to vRealize Operations Cloud. It works a little bit differently than with the on-premises version because we're relying on the VMware Cloud Services authentication portal. So they would log into the Cloud Services portal, and that would allow them to access the various services and products, including vRealize Operations Cloud. So there are 3 service roles that are available in the Cloud Services portal for vRealize Operations Cloud. There's an administrator, read-only, and user. And those actually map to roles inside vRealize Operations Cloud. So the VROps administrator maps to the CSP admin user, VROps read-only to CSP read-only, and so forth. Okay. Once the customer has logged in, then they can create custom roles in vRealize Operations Cloud and reassign those users to those new roles. But this is how the initial mapping actually happens. Okay. You can integrate Active Directory via IDM. There's a KB article and a link to documentation there on the slide of how to accomplish that, but it can be done. The synchronization of users and groups happens every 30 minutes with the Cloud Services portal. Enterprise and custom groups are supported. And again, once the users have logged in through the CSP, they will appear in the user accounts list in vRealize operations under administration access control. And at that point, you can add them to other custom user groups or roles within vRealize operations. The permissions required for collecting from vCenter, you can specify a specific account. For example, in our lab environment at VMware, we have a read-only account on our vCenter servers so that we can ensure that the vRealize Operations Cloud is only collecting, that no actions can be performed, no changes can be made by that user. So that's an extreme example, but be sure to read the guidelines on what privileges, minimal privileges, are required for collection, because your customer will likely ask about that, as typically they'll want to add a service account to handle the collections. For VMware Cloud on the AWS, that also has some particular collection permissions as it relates to the Cloud Services Portal. So you can see those listed here, the roles for the organization and the service that are listed. And then there are some links here to documents and KBs to give you further assistance. But just beware that you do need to add these permissions for VMware Cloud on AWS service, at the CSP level, in addition to any roles that you would create or user accounts that you would create at the vCenter collection level. vRealize Operations provides a billing dashboard for vRealize Operations Cloud, so you can see the details of your consumption, the different object types that you're being billed for. And so I would recommend, and it says here on the slide, I would recommend creating alerts to notify if usage rapidly increases so that nobody gets a surprise bill, or a notification that you've exceeded your entitlement for your subscription. So just be aware that this exists and is available also. By the way, speaking of billing and entitlement, you can exclude VMs from monitoring, metering, and licensing in vRealize Operations Cloud. So you can create maintenance schedules to stop collection of vRealize Operations metrics for virtual machines on the weekends, in the evenings, to lower that consumption with the subscription. You can set up a custom group of those objects and apply it to any object, and this group can be dynamic so that it's always up to date as new virtual machines are added. And then you would just add that maintenance schedule to the policy for that custom group so that those virtual machines would then follow that maintenance schedule. Okay. And then you can always confirm that objects are in maintenance by going to the inventory, looking at those objects, and making sure that the collection state is in maintenance. So that's how you verify that. That concludes this section. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of School of Ops.